Hello, hello. The title says Graduate Studies and My Past Work. So I am in the midst of a Department of Education investigation, not against Saybrook, but against Seton Hall. And potentially, I should just do a shotgun approach through my entire education. So I'll go over the whole thing. I've done it many times before, but lately I've been feeling defeated. And I kind of get the vibe. I've been talking to ChatGTP about this. And I haven't mentioned, I basically send ChatGTP some updated emails from the Department of Education. What are your thoughts on this? And ChatGTP will respond, well, it seems like, the person is using professional language. This phrase indicates, that there's a queue, that there's a log, certain procedure, and this thing needs to be addressed before this, and basically ChatGTP is going at face value and saying like, you know, this is professional writing, and they're just being courteous, and they're being. I didn't mean that to come across like um, they're they're doing what they're trained to do basically. Um, so I don't want to say like ChatGPT. Yeah, they're just human here. They're just being courteous. Well, they are being courteous, but not. I guess the way I was thinking, courteous, but potentially like two-faced. And we'll get into it in a second. Um, so I reached out to the Department of Education. The sequence of events here are: I was dismissed from Seton Hall in July of 2025 after a meeting in June of 2025, and that dismissal came about 9 weeks into the semester, my third semester at Seton Hall, past the probation period. So apparently there was a 12 credit probation period. During my first 12 credits, I was invited to Kappa Delta Pi, which is an honor society for teachers. My GPA was very high, and the um, the professors had positive feedback, and I had reached out to the director of the program and I asked, what are the things I have to do in order to make sure that I have placements? And she said, really, don't worry about that right now. So I get into the third semester and I have 100 averages in those courses, and I get dismissed 9 weeks into the semester, 10 weeks, 10, 11 weeks, about 10 weeks into the semester. And they use some sort of vague allegation of sexual misconduct. So after they decided to dismiss me, I contacted the school's Title IX program. I asked for some reconsideration. I made sure I reached out regarding my law studies at the Seton Hall School of Law, because I had already completed a little, I had completed my legal studies at the Seton Hall School of Law, and I had also reached out to other schools to see if they would investigate Seton Hall so that there's no conflict of interest. Um, I went to prison in the fall. I came out of prison. I had been in communications with another graduate program. I got into that program in January. Um, and in February, I filed a grievance with the Department of Education. They received it in March, and around May, they assigned a lawyer to the case. It's now August, and I'm tired, so just bear with me a bit. Um, I'm redoing this room, so I I had someone come in and measure floors today because I'm thinking of putting vinyl floors in a room that I had recently put carpets in. So basically, my complaint with the complaint I registered with the Department of Education is that I was um, possibly subjected to discrimination and retaliation after I made a complaint in good faith, and after that complaint was made in good faith, um, I was told that my status in the program was at risk, and they decided to dismiss me without giving me any really concrete reason why. Um, I said I was going to start from the beginning and have everything investigated. So I went to nursery and pre-K at a school called St. Lawrence. They only go up to sixth grade. So in kindergarten, I moved to another school, St. Mary's in East Islip. I went to St. Mary's K through 8, and K through 6, I studied with my parents. My mother would drill me on spelling and vocabulary. My father might help me with a little math. He taught me to add a zero when multiplying by 10 and two zeros when multiplying by 100. And I attribute that to a lot of my success in math early on. So that was in third grade. And by the time eighth grade rolled around, I was taking ninth grade math and science. So they put me in accelerated math and science, and this was with some other students. My average, and this is where there's like some Twilight Zone stuff. It is remarkable that I scored nothing below a 95. So the way they had their grading rubric, their scoring structure, they didn't have A plus. They had something called an E. So an E is like 96 to 100, and an A is 90 to 95. On my report card, it says A, and that doesn't seem right, because I I scored a 90 on the Regents, and that was remarkable. And I said, like, I've never scored anything that low on a math exam. I was scoring high 90s, hundreds on exams. My my average in that course was probably 98, 99. So for it to say A on my report card, um, I must have entered another dimension here, because it's not the only grading discrepancy that really stands out on my report card. Now, as far as earth science, I took a kind of, opt out position with earth science. So in seventh grade, they informed me that I would be taking earth science in eighth grade. And I kind of protested this because I said I knew at that time I would be going to Chaminade. And Chaminade was exempt from New York State standardized testing. Their curriculum was deemed superior to the state of New York, where they didn't take New York State Regents exams. So I knew that I would be taking earth science at Chaminade my freshman year. And so I didn't like having the redundancy. Now, I do recall getting some hundreds. Um, I remember speaking up in class and talking about, the clouds, why are they, up there, and they're talking about pressure and stuff. And I remember taking notes in the course and how my penmanship started shaping like the girls, because I would basically, it was like a race who can finish the notes faster. And they taught me how to swoop my Y's and G's and stuff. And so some of the handwriting mannerisms I have are still with me to this day, although my Y's are kind of like straight now. Um, so there wasn't too much of a discrepancy, other than in seventh grade they gave us some sort of exam where it was just like sprung on us. It was it had some concepts like, if a girl throws a ball against the wall, at what angle will it bounce? So, like in physics, they tell you like the launch angle is the same as the return angle. So I tried to think of this from like we used to play handball. How does the ball respond when you throw it against the wall? Well, if you throw it at sidearm, is it going to form a triangle, or is there a way where the ball is going to just come straight back? And I guess there are situations where these are like Spalding handballs, rubber balls. They might bend and change shape a bit, and you might try to put some sort of like, think like topspin. Tennis players might throw the ball up and serve it, and it might bounce in a way where the rotation carries in a different direction. So I forget what I put, but another question that stood out was hanging a plant on a wall, but you only have one piece of string and a board. So I don't know if I can kind of draw it here. Um, just follow my. I'm going. Do you see the mouse cursor? I don't see it in the. Let me see. Is there some sort of paint? So the wall is a perpendicular. It's just up the y-axis. It's 90 degrees, and the you could put the board against the wall, and so now it forms a right triangle. So you put the string at the top of the board, so it looks exactly like a right triangle. Then the other option is putting the string in the middle of the board, and I I guess maybe this one might work because I would assume if you put it in the right triangle configuration and you put that plant on the board, it's just going to slip out from underneath it, right? This is where maybe I'll just get a piece of paper or remarkable. The other option, I guess, was basically putting the string at the end closest to the wall. I later saw this kind of example on Reddit, but since this test was something that was just sprung on us, there was no preparation for it. My answers were, "How the hell should I know?" um, in high so my grievance was with any grade, like for the most part, I saw my grades. I knew where I stood in the course. um, but my question was the Regents exams. I don't know. I believe my professor, the one who taught me math at St. Mary's, is the one who grades it, and I never saw the exam. So for me to get a 90 on the exam was remarkable. So I kind of want to see it, and that's kind of like the case with final exams later on in life. So now I'm taking the entrance exams for high school. I passed the entrance exams. I got into all the high schools I wanted to get into. But Chaminade has equivalency exams to test out of certain subjects. So since the math I took in eighth grade, the ninth grade math, had algebra in it, my freshman year at Chaminade, I might take algebra unless I take this exam, this algebra exam, and test out of it. Well, I guess I failed the Chaminade equivalent. So the Regents exam, the Chaminade curriculum was harder. Um, but now I want to see, my answers. I want to know what I got wrong. Um, for the most part, my performance in the course in algebra was about the same. Um, Chaminade decided to advance me in math once again after my performance freshman through junior year, where in senior year, Chaminade's curriculum is basically the same. And again, I apologize for being tired. Um, so I don't. Let's say they take. Let's say their senior year they take nonlinear equations. Let's say that's an easy course. I have no idea. I don't know how difficult nonlinear equations is, but I took pre-calculus, and that's because that's considered their advanced section. So after I took, geometry, trigonometry, and algebra, they put me in pre-calculus, and not every student took pre-calculus. It's the only advancement I saw within high school. Um, so now we get to standardized testing. I am told the reason that they put a written section on the SAT is to prevent cheating. Basically, they use a handwriting sample. Doesn't really matter what you write, how much you write, or it might matter how much you write, but it's basically used to identify your exam. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I do have a piece of paper that indicates a score combination that I never scored. This was something that was remarkable. I had the goal of beating my sister's SAT score. I finished 10 points below her, and I was content with that. I was okay with that. I didn't set out to go for another SAT. Um, my verbal score was higher than my math score. That was remarkable because I was a much better math student than I was a, writing student, reading student. Um, I would always take shortcuts in those courses. I would read the cliff notes and listen to audiobooks and watch movies. Anything I could do to not read books. It takes me a very long time to read. I don't enjoy reading. Um, and My writing was okay. Grammatically, I guess it was, you know, most of my um, grammar was kind of my freshman English course, I would say, at Shauna did a decent job of teaching me independent clauses, and prepositional phrases, and when to use commas and whatnot. And my college experience kind of reinforced those lessons, um, and I became, I believe, a better writer in college, where writing was my best um, quality over maybe math. Um, that doesn't mean I was bad in math in college. Um, so I have a piece of paper here that says I scored higher on the math. And with the score combination, it actually equals my sister's SAT score. And I didn't, you know, I didn't match my sister. Because what happens with the SAT, if I score if I score 700 on the math and verbal, and I retake the exam, and I get a 750 on the verbal and a 650 on the math, they now take my 750 verbal and my 700 math, so I would have a 1450 SAT. They take your best scores. So this score combination would put me in a score range that I didn't score. And so it stands out to me. But now let's talk about the things that I am absolutely sure of. So during my undergrad, I went to Dickinson College, and my freshman year, I took an intensive writing course on UFOs and string theories. It was potluck. You had no choice in what course. You list your preferences of which courses you might want to take. I didn't get my top choice. I was in this course, didn't teach any lessons. And when I say that, so as far as like how to write, it didn't teach you how to write, but that's not what my complaint is about. My complaint about is about that it didn't carry any life skills. That this course sufficed no learning desire. It was just a bullshit course. We're talking about the randomness of iPod shuffles and flipping coins. there's absolutely nothing gained from this course. The only purpose is to bullshit papers. Like, how effective a writer are you? Can you do a lecture or something? There's nothing to be gained. You're not learning a new language, you're not learning a new skill, you're not learning anything relevant to society. It's completely random and just nonsense. Anyway, I did a lecture on I did a presentation on the Heaven's Gate people. And they're the people that think that there's a spaceship behind the moon and they all drank the Kool-Aid. And I talked about the Burning Man, the Wicker Man. This was before I saw the Wicker Man movie. And these festivals, where they have like, midsummer type things. I asked some of my classmates, how did I do? I have a tremendous fear of public speaking, and I was incredibly nervous. They said I did fine. I'm sure it did go fine. I don't recall thinking like, oh my God, that was the worst thing ever. Like that was so bad. It had to be average for what a you know college freshman seminar could have been. Then I produced a paper. As far as citations, English stuff is more MLA, scientific stuff is more APA. Um, I'm sure this was a lot of, can you cite MLA? But as far as the content of the paper, I, you know, I'm assuming that it was uh, on par with what I've written. I wouldn't say it was an A because I wasn't an A writer at that time. However, the professor, I'm sitting in class and it's due in this class, and I go through my backpack and I look at my folder and I notice that, hey, I left my paper in my dorm. So I tell the professor, hey professor, I left my paper in my dorm. He says, okay, go get it. So after class, I go to my dorm. It's on the other side of the campus, so maybe it takes 10, 15 minutes to walk there, and then it's 10, 15 minutes to walk back. So maybe this is like 20, 30 minutes after class, I hand it to him. When I get the paper back, he took a full letter grade off because he said it was late. Well, no, it wasn't actually. Because if it was due October 12th and I gave it to you October 12th, then it was given to you the day it was due. It doesn't say, well, October 12th at 4:59. Doesn't say October 12th in class. It was on time. This guy was my advisor because your freshman seminar person is your advisor. And, in my sophomore year, I said to him, like, I want to be a math major and I want to take, calculus. He knew I was on academic probation. He says, you don't have the prereq for calculus because, pre-calc at Chaminade doesn't count. It's not an AP course. It's not a college credit. And knowing that I was on academic probation, he lets me take this calculus course, but he doesn't inform me that, oh, well, math, we do that seldomly. We're going to write a paper on Leibniz. We're also going to do an oral presentation, which is going to be a group project. Fuck you. I picked math so I didn't have to write papers, so I didn't have to do a lecture. Dickinson loved oral presentations, class participation, and papers. They are a writing intensive school. I don't know what career they're preparing you for. If they're preparing you for a dissertation or something. But it's not what I was interested in. And it wasn't disclosed to me prior to enrollment. They were a liberal arts school. They were a generic liberal arts school, like every other fucking liberal arts school that I went to tour my junior year of college. Hi, we're a liberal arts school. We have 30 to 33 core credits. If we're a Catholic school, 3 of those credits are in a religion course. Otherwise, those core credits might be humanities, math, science, and some other, topic. Then you need to take X number of courses towards your major, and blah, blah, blah. Nowhere do they describe their curriculum, and I wasn't told what emphasis class participation played on the grade, writing played on the grade. And my sister went there, and all she said of the experience was, it's kind of like high school. So I guess St. Anthony's was writing intensive and had a lot of presentations. I wanted to, I don't know if they were listening to me when I was interviewing and applying to the school. I said I wanted to have a curriculum heavy in code, math, where I wanted to learn sign language. My vision of the future of medicine was heavy in coding, where I thought, diagnosing would be computer assisted. And well, now here we are in a time where I would be in that profession, and there's computer assisted technology, right? So my grievance there, okay, so he took a full letter grade off for the paper being given to him that day. Okay, so maybe my grievance isn't all that, but they did kick me out my sophomore year, 6 weeks in, 3 weeks into the semester, 6 weeks after my grandfather died, and I was passing all my courses. So I didn't have a failing grade, and you know, I I wasn't plagiarizing. I didn't get kicked out for some sort of conduct. And when they dismissed me, they told me, "We don't think you're being very sincere, that I wanted to stay there." And I said, I thought to myself, how could they not think I'm being sincere? Sincerity's paramount. I've been, everything every time they've asked me to petition to stay, I've done what they asked me. This is a school that, probably should have cut ties with me after my first semester rather than string me along. Okay, so now I go to a new school. It's a school I never wanted to go to, but they're the only school that would accept me in my situation. Um, Suffolk Community College had started the semester already, and Hofstra turned me down, even though they had awarded me grant and scholarship money coming out of high school. And so I I go to the school and I do very well. And I guess I had the opportunity to go back to Dickinson. But I decided to stay at the school that I never wanted to go to because I thought it would be beneficial to my long-term career goals. So I abandoned my friends, which is something I've done in the past. And now we get into discrimination. So the year I turned 21, I started experiencing depression. It became acutely aware to me that or that my grandfather was not with me. I had hoped that my grandfather would be there for my 21st birthday, my graduation, and my wedding. I love my grandfather dearly, and he was a huge inspiration on career choices and motivation. I had thought about studying hotel and restaurant management, where I was exposed to a lifestyle of travel, going on cruises and to Las Vegas and Atlantic City. And in those destinations, I would go to restaurants. And a particular influence was Joe Franco of Cafe on the Green. We would go to Cafe on the Green frequently, and Joe Franco would come around and, meet and greet everybody. He was, he would treat his clientele, with respect. And Len Berman just popped into my mind. Len Berman used to be the sportscaster for NBC before Glenn Beck, and I think I saw him at this restaurant once. Um, the major D at that restaurant was Claudio, and some of the waiters were Luigi and Sylvania. My father, remarked on her name because this is the same as a light bulb, which was always kind of like an embarrassing thing for. But they always had, they come around with the specials. We have the portobello mushroom. They always had the portobello mushroom, and they had. This is where I got my taste for steak, where my mother's filet mignon turned me into a carnivore for life, where I primarily order steak at restaurants, but there have been some occasions where I have ordered pasta. Like I used to eat like fettuccine alfredo at this restaurant, and it wasn't until I ordered steak that I really um, had an affinity towards it. But they had a five cheese baked pasta. It's kind of like a baked ziti. Very, it was very good. Then they had a lobster ravioli, and but these things got taken off the menu, and eventually Cafe on the Green got shut down for some sort of zoning violation. Um, I believe Joe Franco had another restaurant called the White House. Um, but due to these experiences, and none of these are like the number one restaurants in the world, but I just had an interest in this sort of lifestyle and potentially going into the restaurant business and the hotel business. But I knew that restaurants had a high turnover rate. 70% of them lose money in their first year, and I wanted a career that could provide for a family, where I could provide my children education, shelter, food, clothing, um, healthcare, and leisure activities, and I chose medicine not because of the salary they commanded, but more for like job security, where I'm my own boss, and that's why um, being in control of my private practice is of utmost importance to me. The whole managed care thing, I don't want insurance companies coming in and dictating care. I thought of like um, I once thought of like doctors, you shouldn't hike up your skirts and bend over for the insurance companies. Don't let them come in and tell you how to run your business, type thing. And I started having an affinity towards the policy side and business side of medicine, and but I chose that career because it's something that I enjoy. I wanted my career to provide me meaning, something that could keep me busy. I wanted to be able to take my work, my craft, and bring it home and perfect it. So I would possibly be a workaholic, um, where that would be my leisure, rather than having a golf game. And another career that I thought of. It was a taboo subject when I was scouting graduate and medical schools and stuff. There were a lot of gamblers in my families, and my father had a patient who was a bookie, and I mentioned restaurants, Las Vegas, Atlantic City. A place I didn't mention is Belmont. I've been to Belmont, many times. It's incredibly boring for children, and the food there wasn't all that good. Um, but it is part of the lifestyle. And my father said, grandfather became good at picking horses and whatnot. And my grandfather, I remember him laying 56 points on Utah, where it must have been Alex Smith, because this was around like 2004, 2005, where Utah was favored by 56 points, and my grandfather took them. Sports betting was illegal, and the only place you can bet on sports was Las Vegas. Um, so I had been, surrounded by a lot of people who were illegally betting on sports, and it wasn't something I could talk about, but it was something that was central to my identity because I was a passionate sports fan. When Young to Owens happened, I went upstairs and cried. I don't know why I cried in that moment, but I'm a huge Niners fan, and I wrote a paper on Steve Young. I'm a huge Terrell Owens fan. I got Jerry Rice's rookie card upstairs. Um, Terrell Owens caught 20 balls in Jerry Rice's final game, and can't understand how the second or third best wide receiver of all time wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer, but whatever. They're going to talk about his all-field antics. Um, so on those biannual trips to Atlantic City we would go on, we would typically go in around May and August. August was around my father's birthday, and that coincided with the football preview issue of Sports Illustrated, and the springtime one coincided with the the baseball preview issue of Sports Illustrated. And since I was too young to gamble, I read these things religiously, and I remember I wanted to become as good of a writer, but a better predictor than the Sports Illustrated people. I felt I had strong analytical and organizational skills where I probably would have had on an aptitude test tested into accounting, but I didn't want to become an accountant because I thought, accountants were just people who worked at H&R Block and did tax stuff. So I stereotyped them, but I wanted to use my skills to be a sports handicapper, to inform sports bettors with a sports column. You should pick the Titans this week against the Jaguars because blah blah blah, and I also maybe wanted to set the spreads where I would be the one who comes up with the spread. We're gonna lay six. We're giving the Titans are 6.5 point favorites. Well, where they come up with that? So I wanted potentially to be one of those individuals. Really, the career is sports journalism, and this was never seen as a serious career path in comparison to medicine. It was one where, first of all, a lot of sports journalists are somewhat celebrities. Even the local newspaper guy like Ron Heyman, it's been a while. Um, he wrote for Newsday, and then he became a contributor to CBS. And my father would always remark how the people in Newsday had these terrible win-loss records for their sports columns, and I was wondering, like, are they just getting in their paragraphs, or are they more concerned about the writing than the predicting? I was more concerned about the predicting. I started doing power rankings when I was a kid, and I have become I successfully predicted several preseason football Super Bowl matchups, at least three of them. Ones that stand out: Packers against the Steelers, Niners against the Ravens, and there's one more somewhere. One that kind of stands out: the Seahawks were picked by Sports Illustrated, and my justification for them not winning or going was it was going to be their third appearance, and I said historically there's only one team that's ever done that, the Buffalo Bills. And recently I came across information that said, well, the Miami Dolphins did it too. And since we have had, teams do it since then, but at the time of this article, and I said, gee, like, when I read recently about the Dolphins, I said, that's got to be a huge oversight because there weren't that many Super Bowls. Like, if you were to say, can you name all the Super Bowl winners? And, like, this is like 2010 or something, maybe 2015. Yeah, well, the Super Bowl only dates back to, the late 1960s, 1967, I guess, where the first Super Bowl wasn't called the Super Bowl. And I guess it was the Packers the first 2 years, and then it was the Baltimore Colts against the Jets in the third Super Bowl. And so you only have like 35, 40 Super Bowls. I guess Super Bowl 50 was 2016. So now we're up to, as time goes on, there's more, but it wasn't that many. Unlike baseball, which dates back to the early 1900s, you're talking about over 100 World Series, and so I actually Peter King gave a master course at Seton Hall when I enrolled in the MA counseling program. So I had the opportunity to learn under him as a sports writer, and there is a sports law program that I have interest in at Seton Hall School of Law. So I'm talking about the the undergrad at the school that I never wanted to go to. Um, I decided to stay there because I thought it would benefit my long-term career goals. I had mentioned that my writing had improved. I attribute that a lot to the freshman seminar that they had, or their English lit class, like one of their early classes that you had to take. Um, it broke things down and like um, helped me develop writing habits that I had previously learned, in high school about, writing the thesis sentence and the supporting sentences and the, closing sentence and the body paragraphs and the conclusion. And I felt that the school developed more, I don't want to say argumentative skills, but verbal comprehension through debate. So classroom debate. Science classes don't really have much room for debate. Things are factual, you know. Um, Nucleic acids are part of DNA. That's just a fact. It's not something you can debate really, right? Unless you, unless you redesign DNA. But in things like anthropology and political science, you have discussions in the class, and I feel that these conversations led to better verbal comprehension, which maybe would have paid off if I was taking the LSAT or something. Um, so okay, I was mentioning that when I turned 21, I started experiencing depression. So I was taking evolution and cell bio at the time, and I remember reaching out to my professor and saying, um, "Can I have an extension for my paper and my?" And this was in March of 2008. And he said, I told him that I had my wisdom tooth extracted, that my grandmother had just died. Both things are true. I just had my wisdom teeth taken out. My grandmother just died, and I needed, an extension for the paper, which I was writing a paper on Robert Sapolsky's "Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers," and he said, "Sure, let your tooth heal and whatnot. You can have an extension." And then I submitted the paper, and he said, "I thought you needed an extension." I wound up giving him the paper early. I was in such a groove at that point. Like I was, like this was my academic peak, and I was about to go down a downward trajectory because at this time I was aware that my grandfather wasn't with me. I was in a place that I didn't want to be. So I started developing an identity crisis where I wasn't sure if the academic success I was having was because the material was beneath me, where the course material was easy, or because, this was what I was capable of doing all along, and now I was just more focused on my work. So I started going through this complex, and this is kind of what triggered, my complex grief. And by the time the fall semester came around, I went to a doctor and I started taking SSRIs. So that was in October of 2008. In November of 2008, I reached out to my professors and I said, I'm going to complete all these courses. We're this many weeks into the semester. I just need to take these exams. Can you make accommodations for me? One professor denied receiving that email. The second professor, the final exam was a take home exam. And all he needed to do was give me a Scantron. So when I actually went to him in person and like, so I was still going to class at this time. And I asked him, and he says, "I can't." And I said, "Why not?" "You know why. You know why. Like, if I knew why, I wouldn't be asking." So I started like speculating, why wouldn't he give me this exam early? Does he think I'm going to cheat? Does he think people are going to cheat off me? For some reason, I think that second one is the reason. He thought other people were going to cheat off me. So, or potentially, the test wasn't hard enough or something. Um, so, had he given me that take home final, I had already gotten 10 out of 10 on the quizzes and 10 out of 10 on lab reports, and I got a 94 in the midterm. A take home final, that's a slam dunk for an A. I had already completed the laboratory final, and my answer was the same as everybody else's. You know why I know that? Because, first of all, it was open book. We all had, gotten the answer wrong for the first time. He was asking us, how do you test the efficacy of ethanol? the hand sanitizers, the Purell hand sanitizers. So we all went to our notes and we're trying to figure out what so we all submitted an answer and he said, "You all got it wrong." So he's going to give us a second attempt. And he went over to a student named Jackie and he says, "Jackie's on the right track. You can't stain living cells." So we all did simple staining. And, you know, if we all, got that one wrong, then we all got that question wrong. But people passed that course. And so in the previous course, I had mentioned that I was in cell bio the semester before. So that's an upper class. That's one of the hardest biologies in the curriculum, and I was taking it, like my sophomore year. And halfway through the semester, at the midterm point, he says, "You're going to fail this course." So I started making adjustments in order to not fail the course, and I wound up getting a B plus. And I took the lessons that I had learned from my experiences in cell bio and took them into microbiology and started from the start. So I had 10 out of 10 on all the quizzes, 10 out of 10 on all the lab reports. I had the 94 in the midterm. So now I'm in a position where, if I fail the final, I should still pass the course, right? um, it was the same professor that taught cell bio and microbiology. And so this is the discrimination. He wouldn't give me that final exam. He wound up giving me a in-class cumulative exam versus the take-home exam that was only from the midterm on. The other professor, she said she received the email and she allowed me to retake the course later on. As far as the guy who denied getting the email, he said, "Oh, you're failing the course anyway." Well, that's not true. I was scoring 18 out of 20s, 19 out of 20, 20 out of 20s on these, assignments that we had. We wrote them on yellow legal pads and stuff. And I had most of my laboratory reports in. At the time I was communicating with them, the course wasn't over. So, of course, I had material left to give him. So I had to give him a cat dissection lab, which I was there for. My partner, Andrew, and I did the cat dissection lab. It was, fairly easy. I could identify the jugular and the carotid artery and the kidneys and the heart. And so I also needed to take the laboratory final, which I was told was just diagrams from the book, and you had to, basically write in, rather than have cats at different stations for the final, where it was a cat dissection, so we dissected a cat. Rather than have cats at the final, it was just diagrams from the book, and you just label, what is what. I was told by my lab partner a few years later that there was a student that he made accommodations for where she took the exam at Suffolk Community College. And I was told that those accommodations could not be made. So he didn't give me the exam. He told me I was failing. And I wound up, for these courses, the way this school worked, they were short-staffed. So they could only offer these courses every 2 years. They couldn't offer them every year, whether it be in the fall or the spring. So this delayed my graduation 2 years. And the second time I took these courses, it wasn't worth it. There was so much drama when I took these courses. I described it like the High School Musical. And so once I got past those courses, after the retakes and stuff, now I'm in biochemistry. And biochemistry was one where this professor is notorious for saying, "We're going to have a quiz on chapter 5 this week." And then it's a quiz on chapter 8. So just be prepared for everything. Well, that's the lesson, right? No, fuck you. You tell me there's a quiz on chapter 5, I'm studying for chapter 5. I'm not studying everything in the book. So I remember my professor, my advisor, telling me, "You scored above the median on the midterm." Well, nobody did all that great on the midterm. So he gave us an opportunity to score more points. So he gave us a supplement to the midterm, and I still have it somewhere. Um, but that said, I was in a position to get potentially an A in this course, and I was very proud of myself because on the midterm, there was a question about enantiomers and diasterics, and it said like which of these is not an enantiomer of degalactose or something. Well, the answer was degalactose, but like it showed a six carbon sugar, and it was saying like which one of these is not an enantiomer, and so I had the right answer. So I went to the professor and I said, I have the right answer. Can you give me credit for it? And he said no. And the whole reason why we had a supplement on the midterm is because another student cried that her grade was too low. So not only did she get the supplement on the midterm, but the whole rubric was ch- changed for her. Where like we had a final exam that might have been worth like 20% of the grade. Now it's worth like 10% of the grade or something. So the whole rubric was changed to accommodate this one student. So now I go back to my organic chemistry professor and I said, "Listen, I got this question. I'm right about this, right?" And she looked at my answer and she wrote on my exam. I still have the exam. There's still her handwriting on it, and she says, "Yes, you're right." So I went back to the professor, armed with the support of my organic chemistry professor, and I said, "Can you change the grade?" And he said, "No." And the way this worked is, so the question is worth about 3 points on the exam. So if I got a 90, it would, by not giving me credit on that question, I would have an 87, or, let's say that the 90 was without the credit. With the credit, it would have been 93 or something. It is, its impact was half a letter grade on the transcript. So I finished the course with an 86.4. Had he given, he wouldn't give me a B plus. I said, "Can you give me a B plus?" And he said, "No, I've done you enough favors. You've done me enough favors. You didn't give me credit on the midterm for a question I got right. And had I gotten that right, I would have had a B plus." And I have the math written. Like I reverse engineered this. Like how much could this thing be worth? Like if you get, let's say your paper is worth 30%, and you score 100 on it, you do 100 times 0.3, and that's how you get the points for that exam. So then you have several assignments and um, the whole percentages. So the papers were 30%, the midterms were 50%. So you times your midterm score times 0.5. I'm not saying that this is what it was, but this is how you do the math. So that's 80%, and let's say the final exam is 20%. You times you multiply your final exam grade by 20%, 0.2, and then you add everything up, and that's your score. So I still have the math somewhere, and the other issue was with we had a keg pathway assignment. So basically said eat an apple and trace it through this keg pathway. And the keg pathway is just basically, a expanded view of all the different pathways in the body, and it has glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, electron transport chain. So basically, he's asking me to locate two amino acids or something. So glycolysis takes a six carbon molecule and cleaves it into two 3 carbon molecules. So basically, I just traced the pathway to find two 3 carbon molecules, or down those branches from glycolysis. Now he says, go back. Gluconeogenesis. It's the synthesis of a 6 carbon molecule. How do you get 6 carbons? Is it with 3 carbons? Because after I said, well, you need these two, and he says, you don't need two. Why don't you need two? 3 plus 0 is 3. How am I going to get a 6 carbon glucose if I don't have 6 carbons? Glycolysis is asymmetrical. There's, It's so rather than 100 on my pathway, I got a 93. And that's the difference. That's the A because that thing carried a ton of weight. That was like 30% of the grade. And I got a 28 out of 30 on it. So he took 2 points off because I said you need two 3 carbon molecules. No big deal. Believe me, A's and B's, there's money involved. Like if you go to Discover and you ask for a student loan, they'll give you one and they'll give you, different rates for better grades. So there's potentially money involved. So the undergrad, I identified things that are violations, but I was depressed. I was in a state of shock after being kicked out of Dickinson. I was letting people walk all over me. I didn't want to, I didn't want to stir the pot. I didn't want to rub anybody the wrong way. I didn't want to stick up for myself because I didn't want to blow this opportunity that I had been given. Because my situation at Dickinson, when they told me that, you have to attend an academic probation meeting, I said I'd rather be studying on Sundays than spending my time at a probation meeting. You already taught me, spread out all your material, make sure you have the semester all planned out and have your papers. And so I started incorporating those things that they had taught me in past probation meetings into my thing. And now, they said, do you know why you're a bad student? Because I have poor study habits. I, I wasn't taking my work seriously. So after my grandfather died, I said, no more excuses. I'm dedicating this semester to my grandfather. And the work I started at Dickinson, where I was getting A's and A minuses on my assignments, carried over into the new school, and it was my highest GPA ever until graduate school, where I got 4 O's. Some people like RABT, Albert Ellis. Catastrophizing and masturbation. I hate those words. Drake Spaeth said, masturbation. Why must things be this way? At a residential learning experience in Pasadena. I don't know what his thoughts are on the topic, but the things, they're the way they are. Like, you're not special is the lesson that I was told. Why would someone do something like, why would someone break procedure for me? Like, if I send them a letter, what makes me special to stand out? So masturbation is not something that clicks with me because I'm a person that is interested in QC stuff and QA stuff and quality of care and procedure and trustworthy information, credible information, reliable source within the industry. And the other thing is catastrophizing. So, an example someone gave in my counseling theories course was, if you get an A minus in your counseling theories course, it's the end of the world. Well, code is law. Six Sigma. It potentially is the end of the world because it creates a new narrative in a postmodern approach where there are multiple perspectives to an incident. If someone's looking at your GPA and they see that you have an A minus, when you have all A's and you have one A minus, Why does he have an A minus? What was going on that semester? Oh, well, maybe he was partying. Maybe he was watching too much television. Maybe he was doing something and not taking his studies as seriously as he should have been. And it creates multiple narratives. People speculate. So to eliminate the possibility of those multiple narratives, multiple perspectives, you get a 4.0. And nobody can say, well, they weren't taking their work that seriously and stuff. I've actually seen this live. Who's the guy um, who plays PUBG? It's he's a Twitch guy, and he wears a hat, and he plays things like HZ1. I forget the game. They're all like PUBG games, and he gets on the phone, and this guy must be in his 30s or 40s, and he's playing with a high school guy, and the high school guy is basically saying like, I'm not going to play video games when your age, and the guy responds like, are you doing all you can? Are you taking honors courses in high school? And the guy responds like, no, um, I don't think
Treasure room keys.
to find this
I've never had a
person.
good experience.
I'm getting bad at names now. Summit G, is that it? Summit 1G.
いざって時は俺が力貸してやっからありがたく使っとけ。言いたいことはそれだけだ。まあこっからどうなるかなんてわかんねえけど、どの道俺らは一連卓勝ってわけだ。せいぜい仲良くやってこうぜ。なあ、相棒。
I've been talking for an hour and 3 minutes. Normally, when I speak of the biannual trips to Atlantic City, oh boy, I think of Skip Bayless and like like I forget if I always said this about the sports journalism thing. I don't want to be a public figure. I don't want to be on television. I don't envision myself writing. Like I don't want to be a celebrity. And I figured like the sports journalism world was a small one because the only game in town is Sports Illustrated and ESPN, but that's not really true. There's Dan Graziano, who made his way from being like a sports blogger. Well, he blogged on the NFC West forums. Pedro Gutierrez, I think, was the NFC West guy, and Dan Graziano was also another NFC West guy, and they might have worked their way from like Bleacher Report or, 49ers Web Cafe, some sort of like fan form, and they, started publishing works and worked their way up the system. Like, but I don't know if those lesser outlets pay. Um, Kevin Burkhardt used to be a Mets broadcaster. Steve Gelbs went to St. John the Baptist, I guess, with he was a classmate with my friend from grade school, and he's in the class with the real life Peter Griffin, some girl who appeared on the Kimmy Schmidt, and my friend published a book. I won't call him my friend anymore. We don't talk to each other anymore. Not that I had any falling out with him, but um, he's kind of been caught in crossfire. My friend since I was, like 10 years old or 8 years old. One of my oldest friends from grade school is Joe Hicks. We had to be friends since like kindergarten. I remember going over his home and we were talking about Captain Planet, where I had made a knockoff Captain Ninja, and we would I would dance around in my underwear and stuff, and but this guy, I recall going on his 5th grade birthday, where we went to Manhattan in a limo. We went, and for his 6th grade birthday, we did the same thing, and it was just like 2, 3 of us, and then in 8th grade he had a party at Jillian's and stuff. I was over his home frequently. In high school, we were like joined at the hip. He's kind of had these things like where when I went away so we went to different high schools, but we kept in touch. We were constantly hanging out. We were always going to Sports Plus, movies, diners, concerts, ball games. We were hanging out frequently. And when I was driving, he was we might go to a baseball game on a whim. It might be 4:30. Hey, you want to go to the Met game tonight? And then we go to the Mets box office, and we get field level seats at Shea Stadium, and he invited me to his timeshare in Puerto Rico, and college, we went to different colleges, and we kind of stayed in touch through like World of Warcraft, but I had fallen in love with the people at Dickinson, and they took up a bunch of my time. Some of them have gotten on the phone with Chris. Did I mention his name is Chris? But then when I got kicked out of Dickinson, he was someone that I returned to. He was my only friend back home, and he we hung out, and he invited me to his poker group, and it was my other friend from grade school that I hadn't really seen in a while, and another one of their co-workers who worked at McDonald's, and my friend Chris then abandoned this group, and like he left all his stuff. He left his sunglasses, he left his poker chips, he left his poker table, and like there was some confusion amongst. He was mad at me for switching arena partners. We played World of Warcraft, and he didn't like that I played with someone other than him, and he just had some animosity towards the group, and he actually wrote like a Dear John letter to some members of his St. John the Baptist friend group, where he basically said, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. When he returned to the group, in some people's absence, he would say like, so and so's a fake friend. Let's say Tim's a fake friend. Well, and so he was kind of like in and out of the group, and but I had always been rooting for my friends' romantic and career success. I wanted them to be happy, and I said to this guy, like, this guy was overweight his entire life. I never made fun of his weight, and I said to him, like, we enjoy your company. I like seeing you around. I like when you come out. But I have no problem with people telling me like, I just don't want to come out. I would prefer to do something, especially the people, like we all had things we like to enjoy. Tim liked playing StarCraft. I was playing World of Warcraft with a different guild, so I wasn't even raiding with them and whatnot. So, but in 2016, he invited me to see. He's like, Jose Reyes is back on the Mets. You want to go to his first game as a Met? And so we went, and you can actually see us on television. And that was like one of the last times I hung out with him. And I went off to, I was pursuing my own interests. I was going back to school for an MBA in accounting. I was living in an apartment. I was attempting to date. I was, taking care of Shelby. I didn't really have time to hang out with these people. I was spending most of my time with Shelby and doing other things. And then eventually I moved to Colorado, and I didn't tell them that I was going to Colorado. And before I went to Colorado, I went to a Metallica concert. I didn't call them up and say, hey, you want to go to a Metallica concert? I had intended on inviting this girl to a concert, this girl named Juliana, who I met at physical therapy. But I had looked at myself in the mirror and I said, like if I want a girl like her, I have to lose some weight and, fix up my appearance. And so I went to Neiman Marcus, bought a new outfit, and I started growing out my beard because it creates symmetry in the face. And I started, attempting to lose some weight. And I had even cold turkeyed Ambien. I had tremendous insomnia, so I said, you know what, let me stop taking Ambien. And hindsight, I wish I still had it. There's nothing wrong with taking Ambien, but when I came back from Colorado, I saw him on Facebook and I saw that he lost weight. And the whole thing with Facebook, I was deleting my Facebook, which is weird because like I had deleted this email, and the email that I logged into, I had already deleted this account. So the fact that it was active still, I don't know what was going on. So I had to delete it again. And, I saw that he was on. I saw that he had lost weight, and I congratulated him. I said, hey, you look great. I made no attempt to hang out with him. I found out that he got married. So this guy who was morbidly obese his entire life, in the 2 years that I was gone, managed to lose weight where he was probably thinner than me. He was probably in like the 150s, 160s. I don't know how much skin he has sagging. And then he also managed to find a wife. And I've never seen him date ever in, like my entire life. And so but I don't care that I wasn't invited to a wedding. Like I want a small wedding. I want my parents as witnesses. Small wedding on the beach. Wedding at the views at Mount Fuji and stuff. And it's my day. I've thought about my wedding for a long time in my life, and I don't want to go around kissing the ring and having people subtract from my special day. I want to remember that as one of the best days of my life. And so I don't want people there that that are going to ruin my experience. And so if that's what he wanted. But he says to me in a conversation that I think it'd be apparent by now that the reason that we don't associate, that we've distanced ourselves because you were so toxic. And I was taken aback by this because I couldn't fathom what he was talking about. Because I remember when one of my friends, his father had a stroke, I go to my mother and I says, can you give me some advice on how to be a more supportive friend for him in this moment? And I've always wanted happiness and, for my friends. And I don't really know what he. I had to look up, and like potentially, like I wanted too much for them. Like I want you to have romantic and career success, and like that could be toxic because maybe he doesn't want um, career success or something. I don't know. But I'm actually a fairly laid back individual. There was a moment where we were driving home from my sister's. My father's driving. It's a snowy night. He's got his Cadillac DTS 5.7 North Star engine, and the car starts spinning out. We start drifting all over the road. On the other side of the road is a Mack truck. My heart rate doesn't go up. It's just like I don't care. Like the end, boom. Just accept it, right? And so since he said that I was being toxic, I guess I've held negative attitudes towards everybody in the group. And my old friend Tim kind of got caught in the crossfire where I don't know what his attitudes were to me, but he invited me to his wedding. Um, we parted on good terms. Like I thought I parted with my friends on all good terms. Like I stopped hanging out with them because I wanted to, do things that were of interest to me, things that, were important to me. They were never part of my long-term plans. And none of those things I discussed earlier was I like, well, I got to make time for my friends. It was always like, I don't want any unplanned pregnancies to derail my career pursuits. So I want to get married at 30 after I completed med school and my residency, and then spend 5 years with my wife where we can be activity partners, we can travel, we can raise capital for our future children, and we can just, enjoy each other's company. And then at 35, I could have children after, we've raised some capital and whatnot. And I wasn't planning like, oh, during that time we're gonna be with my friends and stuff. No, my wife was going to supplant them as the person I spend my time with, and I used to think that he and I were like cut from the same cloth. I'm out with this one guy. We're in Patchogue. He's like, "What does Chris do in his room all day?" Like Scott and I were talking, and like, did he win the lottery or something? And like, I was thinking to myself, like, both Chris and I are spoiled. Like like his parents pay for WWE tickets and bought him a $45,000 Camaro, and they'll pay for his meals and whatever game system computer that he wants and stuff. He doesn't have to work a day in his life. Um, he must, like my friend Scott told me, like, I lied on Chris's resume. I put that he was a freelance, computer repair technician or something. Chris's father worked for Grumman, and his mother was, also like some sort of teacher of like engineering or something.